It is time to wake up. In today's video, I'm going to tell you the #1 toxic food substance that you should absolutely never eat. This thing is highly associated and responsible for things like diabetes and all sorts of metabolic damage, thyroid damage, decreased reproductive hormone functioning, and even deficiencies and a lot of other basically oxidative and inflammatory damage to the body. And the kicker is that this toxic substance is actually used in almost every major restaurant, or even just like small restaurants around the world. And especially in the United States, it's extremely common, and it's used to cook our food in all these restaurants. This substance is called vegetable oils, and today I'm going to expose the lies. PUFAs are polyunsaturated fats, and they're basically vegetable oils. It's that type of fatty acid. The interesting thing is, though, that they're all fluff. All these articles, they're in fact just propaganda 101, and I'll show you why. This is actually scary, so keep watching. So let's look at some of these headlines. Now, the fifth headline down on this literally talks about using corn and safflower oil instead of butter or saturated fat to cook with. And this one, it's basically a good fats versus bad fats type thing. And they talk about replacing saturated fats in our diet with polyunsaturated fats. The American Heart Association is proclaiming to replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat. Here's one with a good headline that talks about, it says, "Ask the Diet Doctor the importance of polyunsaturated fat." And basically, they recommend that 1/3 of your diet come from polyunsaturated fat consumption. And for those of you who don't think this is such a big deal, you will after I get into the actual research showing how bad this stuff is for your body. And the fact that these people they're touting how good it is for you is just backwards. It's upside down. They're living in the upside down. Stop living in the upside down. We're going to flip it around and get back to real life. All right, this one basically says that polyunsaturated fats are good for better health. They harp on the claimed benefits in a decrease of inflammation from omega-3s and the potential for proper brain function. They also claim that the foods high in PUFAs contain the necessary vitamins we need. This is all untrue, and I'll show you why. Here's one, Harvard. Fifth paragraph down claims that unsaturated fats are healthier than saturated fats because they help lower LDL. They also claim that eating fried foods, as long as it's not trans fat, is okay to eat. All fried foods are pretty much fried in polyunsaturated fats, unless you made an effort to fry it in butter, for example. Here's a list of the top 30 polyunsaturated fat foods that we just absolutely have to have in our diet. Here's another one from Harvard, basically saying PUFAs are essential because they lower LDL and triglycerides. I'm going to get into kind of some of these myths about LDL in this video and just completely break that open, because people just totally misunderstand this stuff. It's based on assumptions and hearsay, when all this conventional wisdom around this stuff is totally untrue, and I'll show you why. So most, if not all, these claims on polyunsaturated fats being healthy for us are all directed around, and this is why I'm going to break this myth once and for all, the simple facts, or the idea that polyunsaturated fats actually lower levels of the so-called bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol. So what we're going to do today is talk about that, talk about what polyunsaturated fats are, and talk about what LDL cholesterol really is. And you can decide for yourself at the end of this video whether or not what I'm telling you is true. So first, let's look at what is polyunsaturated fat and how does it differ from other types of fats. So polyunsaturated fat is a molecule that has the same molecular structure as the rest of the fats that exist, with the carboxyl group on one end connected to a chain of carbon atoms that have hydrogen atoms attached to them. Now, all the carbon atoms have two hydrogen molecules attached, except for the middle two. They only have one on the same side of the molecule. Now, the unsaturated portion of the molecular structure is a double bond that forms between one, or in the case of a polyunsaturated fat, two or more carbon atoms. Now, monounsaturated fats have the exact same structure, but with only one double bond in between two of the carbon atoms, hence the beginning of the word mono instead of poly. Mono means one. Now, saturated fats basically have the exact same molecular structure with the carboxyl group on one end and a chain of carbon atoms attached with the attached hydrogen atoms. Now, the thing that makes them different, however, is that they have no double bonds between any of the carbon atoms. And then finally, the last type of fat, we've got trans fats. Now, these fats are basically the ugly fat. These are the ones that should be avoided in all circumstances. These fats have the same structure with the double bonds, either a single double bond or a multiple double bond, except with the carboxyl group on the other end of the molecule. Instead of having a chain of carbon atoms with hydrogen attached straight across, they have one of the middle hydrogen molecules on the opposite side of the molecule, which is the trans side. That's why it's called a trans fat. So I want to talk to you a bit about right now why PUFAs are absolutely no good for you. They're terrible for your body. So what actually happens when we consume polyunsaturated fats? Well, the higher temperature from our bodies can cause the rigid double bonds found in this molecule to be oxidized and broken apart because they're not flexible or able to withstand the heat. So temperature basically oxidizes this type of fat. When this happens, the molecule forms free radicals, which are molecular structures that contain an unpaired electron. Basically, when this happens, the free radical goes around wreaking havoc on all the other molecules around it to either find a way to gain an electron or to get rid of an extra electron. Now, in the process of trying to do this, it damages other healthy molecular structures that happen when polyunsaturated fats are oxidized, which in turn damages healthy cells and vital structures that are needed to perform optimally. This also happens to monounsaturated fats, but on a much, much lower level and a much less frequent level because they only have one double bond, making them a little bit more flexible, giving them a higher boiling point as well. This is why consuming them is okay, but we shouldn't put them in excessive heat conditions. For example, we shouldn't cook with them. Then there are the saturated fats. Now these fats, the saturated fats, do not have double bonds. This allows the fat molecule to be really flexible, allowing it to have the highest boiling point out of all the fatty acids. These single bonds are able to move and rotate in whatever way they need to, allowing them to adapt to high temperatures very, very well. Now, this allows the fats to be consumed by the average human being without the oxidation of the fatty acid creating free radicals. And then again, we come to trans fats. Trans fats basically have a super low boiling point due to their double bonds, just like polyunsaturated fats, and the trans hydrogen structure. Now, needless to say, this group of fats should be avoided because they create basically the most free radicals and cause the most damage in general. So this study right here demonstrates that how these double bond fatty acids like polyunsaturated fats and trans fats negatively correlate to mammal longevity. So that's length of life. And this right here shows that PUFAs and trans fats can really disrupt on a cellular level the normal membrane structure, and they do so through the mechanisms that I just described about how they oxidize so easily. Now, again, here's a bit of a definition of the free radicals if you want to learn a bit more about free radicals and antioxidants. So in this section, I'm going to talk about cholesterol because I'll do a whole video on cholesterol, but it's really important that in this context you understand the truth about cholesterol, the truth about HDL, and the truth about LDL, because there's a lot of misinformation about it, a lot of hearsay, a lot of false conventional wisdom, and it's important in this context because all these so-called studies and articles that are touting the benefits of polyunsaturated fats are completely inaccurate because they are actually demonizing something that should not be demonized. So let's take a look. Now, what's interesting is that people don't even realize that HDL and LDL are not even the actual cholesterol molecules that are the so-called bad guys. If you were to live in the 70s, for example, that was a big propaganda push then. So HDL, which actually stands for high-density lipoprotein, and LDL, which stands for low-density lipoprotein, are simply lipoproteins, which are carrier proteins for the cholesterol to get from point A to B. Now, HDL transports excess cholesterol to the liver where it can be excreted by the body. LDL transports cholesterol to cells throughout the body to be used to make steroid hormones and other things like the cell membrane. Now, the problem that many have had with LDL cholesterol was the implication that it builds up in the arteries, quote, causing heart disease. This is actually a false idea because the reality is that when there is damage in the artery, the LDL cholesterol is sent to the damaged area of the artery to actually give those cells the cholesterol they need to properly heal themselves. But when the LDL is in excess, there's basically too much of a good thing right there, and it only happens because of imbalances in the body in other ways. So the real way to solve, quote, heart disease is to correct the root cause of the inflammation response that triggered the body to send the LDL lipoproteins in response to that inflammation in the first place. You have to actually heal the inflammation. That's how you cure heart disease. It's nothing to do with the cholesterol. Now, I'll do another video on this. Cholesterol is not the bad guy. Please stop believing that myth. So now we're going to break down the truth about polyunsaturated fats. Now you understand the truth about these other things like the cholesterol. So let's look at how damaging polyunsaturated fats are to your body and why you should probably never eat them again. Now, this study has shown a negative correlation between the maximum longevity of mammals and the consumption of fats with double bonds, polyunsaturated fats. Their claim was that these results, together with the previous ones obtained in rodents, birds, and humans, suggest that the low degree of tissue fatty acids unsaturation of longevous homeothermic animals, it's a lot of researchers speak, basically animal longevity, could have been selected during evolution to protect the tissues against oxidative damage. So this study showed that when the mothers actually consumed a high level of polyunsaturated fats while pregnant, that the concentration of polyunsaturated fat caused an increase in estrogen signaling for the mothers and a decrease in progesterone signaling. Now, I've talked about this in other videos. Estrogen is a stress hormone, progesterone is a protective hormone. When you have these kinds of imbalances happen, a lot of bad things happen to the body, including cancers, including hair loss, and that sort of thing. And that's why this is something that everyone needs to avoid, men and women. Now, this study shows and supports that the higher the PUFA intake, the lower the maximum lifespan for mammals, and they were basically saying that the maximum lifespan indeed decreases as the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 PUFAs increases. So this study showed that the polyunsaturated fats exposed to neural tissues of embryonic chicks during, those are chickens, not chicks, during various stages of development could impair neural development. They also stated that glucagon naturally suppressed mobilization within the fetus. So, for example, at day 18 of development, the proportions of these fatty acids that were released into the incubation medium were respectively 6.5 and 7.5 times higher than in the original tissue tag. Now, glucagon stimulated the overall rate of mobilization by approximately twofold and also partially suppressed the preferential mobilization of C20 to 22 polyunsaturates. Now, this study showed that the consumption of PUFAs from both arachidonic acid and eicosapentaenoic acid in a dose-dependent manner increased the vascular permeability of the vascular system within the brain in rats, and by the increase of the free radical damage that was caused by the breakdown of these double bonds, the oxidation of these double bonds from the fatty acids. This study has some really good data, so if you want to do that, if you want to look at it, I'm going to put it in the link in the bio down below this video. This study showed that the effect of DHA, EPA, and ALA, there was an effect on the electrophysiological components of the heart and the function of the heart. So the results showed that all of them had some kind of a negative contractive effect. It's called inotropic, and chronotropic, which is like the speed of rate effect on the heart. The EPA and ALA actually elongated the QTC interval, and the higher the concentration, the more spread out the wave intervals were on the QTC. So you know how freaking inverted this is? People are saying that you need to eat these to protect your heart, and this study is showing explicitly that by consuming these polyunsaturated fats, it actually damages your heart. Jeez, it's ridiculous. The study shows that there is a direct inverse correlation between the amount of total daily energy consumption coming from polyunsaturated fatty acids and testosterone production. They're directly inversed. So the more PUFAs you eat, the less testosterone you're going to produce. And this is proven in a dose-dependent manner that the total energy consumption, that the more of the total energy consumption that comes from the PUFAs, the lower the testosterone became in the subjects. This also showed some really good findings, with higher amounts of protein also having a negative correlation to testosterone as well. And I talk about this study in my book, Master Your T. It's a really interesting study in terms of looking at like breakdowns of different macronutrients and that sort of thing. So this study right here showed what free radicals really are and what they can do within the body, like the amount of tissue damage that they can have. And again, when PUFAs oxidize, which they can actually be oxidized by light, which is insane. they're so weak, the bonds are so weak that they cause so much free radical damage, and they can cause some of the problems in this study. The study states that the prevalence of an increase in the omega-6s in a diet, which is a PUFA, had a prevalence toward increasing insulin resistance. So basically causing diabetic symptoms in people the more PUFAs they ate. It also refers to the increased prevalence of these free radicals with the increased PUFA consumption. So, I mean, this isn't like, once you start to get it, like once you start to understand, it's not so surprising that this PUFA consumption, I actually have the theory that I don't think diabetes is caused by an increase in sugar consumption at all. I think that's a red herring. I think that they're sending people off on a freaking goose chase with that one, avoiding the real cause of diabetes, which is actually high PUFA consumption and inactivity. There's actually another study showing that inactivity for as little as a few days actually caused diabetes symptoms in the human body. So if you have that combo, the PUFAs and the inactivity, that's what causes diabetes. And the PUFA, I'll do a whole video on the diabetes myth. I'll break this down exactly how this works. It's interesting. But once you start to get it, you start to get it. So this study was really interesting. They showed that the diet that was rich in the omega-6 fatty acids, which are PUFAs, during pregnancy actually had a positive correlation with autistic sociability disorder. They correlated it to the increased stress that was caused during the pregnancy period. So that's scary. When I'm having kids, my wife's definitely not going to be eating PUFAs, that's for sure. This study looks at the effects of polyunsaturated fatty acids on neonatal monocytes. The claims basically are that the polyunsaturated fatty acids modulate the immune response in vitro. This study showed that the prevalence of unsaturated fatty acids actually had an atherogenesis effect. This was due to the high metabolization of HDL cholesterol and the impairment of the ABCA1 macrophage pathway. So basically what all this means is, again, another like freaking weird inversion about how they're saying that cholesterol causes heart disease when this, or atherosclerosis essentially, hardening of the arterial plaque, when this study is actually showing that it's the PUFAs that cause it in the first place. And like I said earlier, you got to find the real cause of that is by finding the root of the inflammatory response in the first place, which was the PUFA consumption. Boom. This study showed the prevalence of the high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio that was seen in the typical Western diet, and that is actually correlated with the increased risk of heart disease, autoimmune disease, cancer, and inflammatory diseases. So they go into a lot of detail in this study about how the increase in the omega-3 content of the diet, and they're talking a lot about this ratio, actually reduces the risk of these diseases, which there's a lot of like correlational data and that type of thing, so it's not necessarily causational. This study shows that there is a positive correlation between men who are on a vegetarian diet, which is naturally higher in polyunsaturated fats, and an increase in SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin, which basically is a protein that binds to free androgens. You don't want high SHBG content. So the increased amount of PUFA showed an increased amount of SHBG, and this was on a vegetarian diet. Versus those who are on an omnivorous diet had way less problems with that. They had significantly less, way more balanced SHBG levels. Now the conclusion was basically that the vegetarian group of men on the high PUFA diet had significantly less testosterone available for the androgen receptor sites. That's how it works. So this study talked about the Ldl oxidation and the effect that it can have on the general signaling pathways and gene expression. It also talks a bit about the apoptosis effect, which is programmed cell death in the epithelial cells in the arterial walls by the oxidative damage. So again, we're looking at basically PUFAs causing atherosclerosis symptoms. The study talks about the 5 different commercial solvents that are used for the extraction of a very common PUFA oil called cottonseed oil. So the solvents for this are hexane, benzene, acetone, ethyl ether, and betanone. That's an interesting way to think about things. I don't think a lot of us think about like how do they get these oils out of the plant, and what they're using is they're using some heavy duty industrial chemicals to get these out. So right there, you're already in the plant, but basically it's almost guaranteed by the time the oil is extracted from the seed or the plant, it's actually oxidized already and rancid. So you're buying and eating rancid oil. So the study showed that the ingestion of these fatty acids when oxidized increased, and these are omega-3 fatty acids in this study, showed that the ingestion of the omega-3 fatty acids when oxidized increased inflammation specifically in the upper part of the digestive tract in the duodenum. So duodenum's like the upper intestines, essentially. So the study showed that the effect of the consumption of omega-3 fatty acids basically had the like a peroxidation effect of the cell membranes and inhibited an effect of positive effects on the antioxidant system. And then this study showed that the effect they showed the effect of EPA consumption on young males and the fact that it decreased fibrinolytic activity and increased coagulation activity. So their claim basically came to show that the daily EPA consumption could affect the liver and kidney functioning. So this study showed a direct link between polyunsaturated fatty acid consumption and reduced function of the exportation of fats out of the liver from regulation of hepatic apolipoprotein B degradation and VLDL production. It seems like it's pointing to like potentially having complications and causing fatty liver disease. So here's an interesting one in rats that they showed that there was a significant correlation between statins and vegetable oils and decreased survival rates in the rodents, and they basically made them prone to stroke and spontaneous hypertension. Basically, it also shows the relationships that these oils have to damaging kidneys and inhibiting many vitamin K2 pathways, which if you have read my book, Master Your Tea, you know how important vitamin K2 is for your body. Now, here's a really big study that showed that polyunsaturated fat intake was highly associated with IBS, Crohn's, and ulcerative colitis, and they had 4,000 controls in this study, so it's pretty freaking airtight on that one. This study showed a correlation between wound healing and topical treatment of polyunsaturated fats. It showed that the omega-3 fatty acid linolenic acid significantly delayed wound healing and delayed nitric oxide production at the wound site. However, basically they did support the fact that the 6 and 9 did help a bit, but with 9 being the most significant. Now, this study showed that there might be an inverse correlation between early memory in pre-birth infants and exposure to polyunsaturated fats. So there's essentially like potential hypothalamic damage, because that's where that's kind of the memory center of the brain, is the hypothalamus. The study shows that PUFAs actually cause an efflux of calcium from the mitochondria, inhibiting the function of the mitochondria. So they're almost causing deficiencies in the brain and on the cellular level. So this study showed that the effect of PUFA exposure, what the PUFA exposure had, and a derivative of PUFA, it had a major effect on steroidogenesis, which is the production of steroid hormones, and an increase in glucocorticoids, which basically is an increase in stress hormone production from the adrenal glands. There was also a stimulation of adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. So, in spite of all this, like there's a freaking massive amount of evidence showing how bad this stuff is for you. And again, I'm like blown away that we've been brainwashed into thinking this stuff is healthy. So that's why I'm trying to expose this. This goes all the way to the top. Let's look at what the government says about this. So on page 24 of this document, they actually show the Us Dietary Guidelines for the part of the diet that comes from fat. Only 10% of the fat should come from saturated fat. That's what they say. And basically, then you look at the American Heart Association losing their mind and ignoring all of this evidence that in order to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, they think replacing saturated fat with PUFA is the best option, which is insane. And, this is like conspiracy level stuff of like how to, I'll let you make your own conclusions about what's exactly going on, but it seems like all these recommendations that come out from the mainstream media, from the government regulated bodies, from these medical associations, are all actually designed to keep us in certain patterns where we have lower reproductive hormones, we have lower functioning thyroids, lower energy, and we have more deficiencies. So I'll let you figure out the why yourself, but the evidence is pretty strong. So also at this point, a lot of you might not, a lot of you guys have followed me for a while, you know that saturated fats are not bad for you, but a lot of people who might be coming in watching this video might still think, oh, saturated fats are bad for you. maybe polyunsaturated fats are bad for you too, but aren't saturated fats bad for you? Well, let's look at some research about saturated fats. So this article, this study right here, actually supports the fact that there's no correlation whatsoever between saturated fat consumption and all-cause mortality, coronary heart disease, CHD mortality, ischemic stroke, or type 2 diabetes in healthy adults. It also states that greater consumption of saturated fatty acids was linked to a slower generation of atherosclerosis, while PUFA and carb intake, for example, like polyunsaturated fats combined with sugar, was linked to an increased progression of atherosclerosis. All right, we're finding the truth here, right? It's pretty obvious when you actually look at the research. All right, this study showed that the saturated fatty acids suppressed adrenocorticotropic hormone release, which basically, is basically stimulating release of stress hormones. So saturated fats slowed down and very, basically regulated the release of stress hormones in the study. This study shows a positive correlation between saturated fatty acids and testosterone levels, which I also talk about in my book, Master Your T. And this study showed a positive correlation between coconut oil consumption as well as pig lard and testosterone levels rising significantly more versus those that were on a diet containing olive oil, fish oil, sunflower oil, and sesame oil. So olive oil is technically a monounsaturated fat. So and then the fish oil, the sunflower oil, and the sesame oil are all polyunsaturated fats. So the pig lard and the coconut oil actually outperformed those on testosterone biomarkers massively. So at this point in the video, you're probably like completely, you feel like if you believed vegetable oils were real or healthy for you, you probably have your whole world like flipped upside down, which is kind of my intention, because the world that we are living in before we kind of wake up to this reality is actually the upside down world about this whole thing. It's like the world that we're born into is the inverted reality. We gotta like flip out of it and see the truth, right? So you're probably a bit curious about what you should actually eat, how you should actually eat to optimize your health. So what I did is I've been studying this stuff for like 10 years. I've written multiple books, hundreds and hundreds of articles, and done videos that have had many, many millions of views, especially on Facebook, tons and tons of views of people like to help wake their mind up. I've seen so many patterns from people that I've now been able to distill this into a system that you can use to identify where the root cause is. And it's typically in one of three organ systems in your body. So you've got these three organs: the liver, the pituitary, and the thyroid are essential for your health. So typically we have dysfunction at least one of them, caused by micronutrient deficiencies and hormonal imbalances, which then spirals into other problems later in life. So what I did is I made a tool at thethermodiet.com/quiz. There is a short quiz. It'll take less than 60 seconds, and I ask a couple key questions. They're a bit unorthodox questions. Like your doctor will never ask you these questions, but they help me really identify accurately which body type you are. So when we identify which body type you are, I'm going to give you a little system that helps you bridge the gap to bring your body back to baseline so you can feel great and feel healthy again. So again, go over to thethermodiet.com/quiz and take the quiz. It'll help you to find out exactly how you should eat using this framework of health, like correcting micronutrient deficiencies, bringing your body into a state of hormonal balance for increased energy, for better libido, for just better health in general, vibrant health, better longevity. We're going to expose the truth here, and then I'm going to help you to get back on the road to wellness. Go over to thethermodiet.com/quiz, and I'll see you on the next video.